She was a CEO, rich, ruthless, and impossible to impress. He was just a janitor, invisible to everyone. Until one day, she said with a smirk, "If you can play Chopin, I'll marry you." She didn't know he'd once played for his dying mother. What he did next left the whole office speechless. Before we dive into this emotional journey, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to 4 more heart-touching stories that stay with you. The towering glass windows of the Kingston Tower cast long shadows across the polished marble floor as the afternoon sun began its descent. Inside, the office buzzed with quiet tension. CEO Olivia Kingston, impeccably dressed in a steel grey pantsuit, stood like a statue beside her mahogany desk. Her arms were crossed, her expression cold, watching yet another disappointed suitor storm out of her office, red-faced and humiliated. His failed attempt to impress her had ended like all the others, met with a blank stare and a sharp dismissal. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, her assistants exchanged knowing glances, barely concealing their amusement. Olivia turned toward them, her red lips curling into a smirk. "He brought me roses and recited poetry from his phone," she scoffed, shaking her head. "Pathetic." Then, tilting her head with a theatrical flair, she added with an amused glint in her eye, "Honestly, I'll marry the first man who can play Chopin without looking at the keys." Her voice dripped with sarcasm, the challenge more of a joke than an actual offer. The room erupted in laughter. Her staff chuckled, accustomed to her dry humor and impossible standards. One of them muttered, "Guess you're staying single, boss." Another added, "Chopin might as well ask for a unicorn." But in the corner, a man in a dark blue janitor uniform remained silent. He was partially hidden behind a large indoor plant, mop in hand, diligently cleaning the already spotless floor. His name tag read, Thomas. No one paid him much attention. He was just part of the background, a fixture of the building like the vending machines or the water cooler. Yet, at that moment, a faint flicker crossed his face, a twitch of recognition, perhaps nostalgia, as he absorbed Olivia's words. No one noticed him pause for a breath, eyes momentarily distant, before he returned to his work. Hours passed. The office began to empty, the clatter of keyboards slowing to a stop as employees filtered out for the night. The once noisy corridors grew quiet, the luxurious halls dimmed to soft amber lighting. Olivia, still in her office, reviewed spreadsheets and contracts under the glow of a desk lamp. She reached for her phone, then decided against it. Her evenings were always the same, silent, routine, void of warmth. She often stayed late, not out of necessity, but habit. As she stepped out of her office for a stroll to clear her mind, a faint sound reached her ears. A melody, gentle, melancholic, floated down the corridor. It was faint, like a whisper in the dark. She followed the sound instinctively, her heels clicking softly against the floor as she neared the source. The lounge was dimly lit, empty except for the grand piano in the corner, a decorative piece more than a functional instrument. No one had played it in years, yet now it came alive. Her breath caught. Sitting at the piano was Thomas the janitor. His uniform looked out of place against the sleek black of the grand piano, but his hands moved like silk across the keys. He played knock in E-flat major with astonishing grace, eyes closed, face calm. Each note emerged as though pulled from his soul. There was no hesitation, no sheet music, no glancing down, just pure, flawless music that seemed to breathe life into the air. Olivia stood frozen. Something in her chest stirred, something long buried. The music was not just beautiful, it was emotional, filled with longing and pain and hope. It was as if the piano itself was weeping, and yet, somehow, healing her. She didn't dare interrupt. The man she had barely acknowledged, the one who mopped her floors in silence, now sat before her, revealing a piece of himself she could never have imagined. And for the first time in years, Olivia Kingston was speechless. The office was a different world after dark. The usual hum of conversation, clicking keyboards, and ringing phones had faded into stillness. Only the soft drone of the city outside lingered through the tall glass windows. The night shift lights cast a muted glow across the floor, turning sharp corporate edges into soft silhouettes. Most of the staff had left hours ago, but Olivia Kingston returned quietly, her heels echoing softly down the hall. She told herself it was for some last-minute paperwork, but deep down something else tugged at her unresolved thought, a sound that still echoed in her mind from earlier. She didn't expect the music again, yet there it was, faint but clear, floating like a dream through the corridors. That same haunting melody, Chopin again, the same piece, nocturne in E-flat major. Curious and drawn in, Olivia followed the sound down the hallway like a thread of silk, pulling her into a forgotten story. The door to the lounge was slightly ajar. She stepped inside, careful not to make a sound. He was Thomas in his janitor's uniform, slightly rumpled, sitting on the bench with his back straight and his head tilted gently toward the keys. The piano reflected the low light like a lake under moonlight, and his hands moved across it like water, fluid and effortless. His fingers danced, not with flashy flair, but with something deeper, something rooted in emotion and memory. Olivia didn't speak. She didn't move. She just stood there, half hidden in the shadow of the doorway, unable to look away. This man, this quiet, overlooked man who cleaned the office floors, played with the skill of a master. But it wasn't just talent that held her breath still. It was the feeling. Every note trembled with a tenderness she hadn't heard in years. It stirred something deep inside her, something she didn't have a name for. She had attended countless galas and heard world-class performances, yet none had touched her the way this unassuming janitor's music did now. After a long minute, the music slowed. The final notes hung in the air like dew before they dissolved into silence. That's when she finally stepped forward. "Where did you learn that?" Her voice came out softer than she expected. Thomas turned, surprised but calm. His eyes met hers, fearful or embarrassed, but open. There was no shame in his face, only quiet truth. "I used to play for my mother," he said after a moment, his voice gentle, steady, "when she was sick. Dying, actually," she said. "When I played, it made the pain disappear, so I played every night, even when I was falling apart. I kept playing for her." His words sat in the air, unchallenged. Olivia stood still, arms at her sides, unsure of what to say. Her usual armor, the sarcasm, the indifference, the cool executive mask began to crack. She looked at him again, really looked. For the first time, she saw more than the uniform, more than the mop and bucket, more than the silent figure in the background. She saw the loss in his voice, the devotion in his hands, the strength in his silence. Then he smiled faintly. "You said you'd marry the man who could play Chopin without looking at the keys," he said, his tone laced with quiet amusement, not mocking but light. "But I didn't do it for that. I just missed the music." There was no arrogance, no expectations, just honesty. Olivia opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Her mind spun with 1,000 thoughts, but none of them found words. She was used to control, to power, to having the upper hand. But here, in the quiet of this lounge, with Chopin lingering in the air, and Thomas sitting before her with nothing but truth in his eyes, she had none. She was, for the second time that day, speechless. The rain tapped gently against the wide windows of the office kitchen, each drop a soft, rhythmic whisper in the otherwise quiet night. It was past working hours, and the building had emptied into silence once again. The hum of the city faded behind the curtain of rain outside, giving the moment an almost sacred stillness. Olivia stood at the counter, waiting for the kettle to boil. She glanced over at Thomas, who sat quietly at the corner table, his hands wrapped around a ceramic mug she had given him moments earlier. For a moment she studied him, the way he sat with quiet composure, the way his eyes seemed to carry both peace and sorrow at once. There was a gravity to him that she hadn't seen in anyone else in a long time. She poured the tea, handing him a cup without a word, then sat beside him. "I never expected to be having tea with the janitor," she said softly, her voice lacking its usual sharpness. There was no insult in it, only honesty, and perhaps a hint of wonder. He offered a faint smile. "Me neither, but here we are." Silence stretched comfortably between them. Then Olivia turned toward him, her curiosity finally winning over her usual guardedness. "Tell me the rest," she said. "You don't play like someone who just happened to pick it up. You play like someone who was born for it." Thomas looked down at his tea for a long moment before answering. "I was," he said, "born for it. I mean, I started playing when I was 5. My dad left early on, so it was just me and my mum. She worked double shifts just to pay for my lessons. Said she saw something in me." He gave a soft laugh. I was 15, I got accepted into Juilliard." Olivia blinked. "Juilliard," he nodded. "Full scholarship. They called me a prodigy. I was supposed to be something big. I believed it, too." Her eyes widened slightly. "So what happened?" "My mum," he said simply. "She got sick a few months after I got in cancer. It came fast, aggressive." His fingers tapped absently on the mug, like they still wanted to play a melody. "She couldn't work anymore. The bills piled up. The treatments, they were brutal." He paused, the memory weighing heavily in the air. "I had a choice. Stay in school, chase the dream, or come home and take care of her. There was no real choice though. She was everything to me, so I left. Olivia didn't speak. Her gaze was fixed on him, her expression softening with each word he shared. She passed about a year later. I never went back, never played again, either. Not for a long time. He looked over at her. Until I found that piano in the lounge a few weeks ago. Something about it, I don't know. When I play, it feels like she's here again, sitting close by, smiling, just like she used to. The rain outside grew steadier, a soft percussion against the window pane. Olivia's throat tightened. She'd spent her life surrounded by people who performed for her approval, chasing her money, her name, her power. But this man he had once had everything, and had willingly let it go. For love. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. She looked at him, really looked. Most men chase me for my money, she said quietly. You gave up yours for love. Thomas didn't respond. He didn't need to. In that still kitchen, under the watchful rhythm of the rain, something shifted between them. Not romance, not yet, but respect. Real, rare, and quiet. The ballroom sparkled with crystal lights, polished mirrors, and the soft clinking of champagne glasses. It was the annual Kingston Corp Gala, dazzling event meant to impress clients, executives, and investors. Everyone had dressed to perfection, wearing tailored suits, glittering gowns, and rehearsed smiles. In one corner stood a grand piano, untouched, more decoration than instrument. The buzz of polite conversations and hollow laughter filled the air, blending into the soft hum of string music playing over the speakers. Olivia Kingston stood at the edge of the stage, her presence commanding, as always. She wore a deep emerald evening gown, elegant and sharp, like everything else about her. But something in her eyes tonight was different, quieter, more thoughtful. She scanned the crowd, filled with familiar faces, board members, media personalities, executives trying too hard, yet none of them held her attention. She stepped up to the microphone, and the room gradually hushed. Thank you all for being here tonight, she began, her voice calm and measured. This evening was meant to celebrate excellence, innovation, passion. There were nods and polite applause. But tonight, she continued, I'd like to shift our focus. For just a few minutes, I want us to honor someone who represents those qualities not in headlines or numbers, but in silence, in sacrifice, in soul. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Olivia paused, her eyes scanning until they landed on a familiar figure standing off to the side, half hidden behind the heavy curtains near the stage. She smiled, then turned back to the microphone. Tonight, someone special will play for us. Someone we often overlook. Thomas, the janitor. There was an audible gasp. Several heads turned. Some people exchanged confused glances. Others whispered. Olivia held her ground, chin lifted, unwavering. Thomas stepped forward slowly. He wore a simple black suit, borrowed clearly, and he looked unsure of where to put his hands. His shoulders were slightly hunched, but his face was calm. The spotlight felt heavy, unfamiliar. He wasn't used to eyes on him, especially not hundreds of them. As he approached the piano, some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. A few even chuckled under their breath. A janitor performing at a corporate gala. It felt like a stunt. Thomas sat down at the piano and took a long breath. His fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, then descended. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major rang out soft, sure, and heartbreakingly beautiful. In seconds, the whispers died. In a minute, the room was still. His fingers moved like flowing water, each note a stroke of emotion, tender, aching, raw. He played not with flair or drama, but with feeling. Real, unfiltered feeling. The crowd, used to polished performances and curated speeches, found themselves stunned into silence. There was something undeniable in his playing, something that bypassed logic and went straight to the heart. Olivia stood just off stage, watching him. The same man who had once been just part of the background now sat under the lights, commanding the room without saying a word. And as he played, she saw everything again: the way he spoke about his mother, the quiet dignity in his eyes, the soul behind the music. A tear slipped down her cheek before she even realized it. It wasn't just the music, it was the truth of him. And now the world saw it too. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a sky painted in hues of lavender and deep orange. On the rooftop garden of Kingston Tower, the city stretched out in every direction, a sea of lights blinking beneath the early twilight. The air was cool, carrying the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves from the potted trees that lined the rooftop's edges. Soft garden lights glowed underfoot, casting a golden warmth over the stone path where Olivia and Thomas stood alone. She had asked him to meet her there after the gala, Her voice quiet and steady, though her eyes said more than her words ever could. He had come unsure of what to expect, still stunned by the reception of his performance. The applause had been thunderous, but it hadn't mattered to him. What had mattered was the look on her face as he played, the way her usual coolness had melted into something vulnerable, something real. Now they stood together beneath the open sky, surrounded by silence and stars. Olivia turned to face him, the wind tugging gently at her hair. Her gaze was softer than it had ever been, not just toward him, but toward anyone. The armor she had worn for years, the cynicism, the cold ambition, the sharpness was gone. "I meant what I said," she said, her voice just above a whisper. "But not just because you played Chopin. That was extraordinary, yes. But it's what you carry inside you that changed everything for me. The world chases power and prestige, Thomas. I've lived my whole life in that world. But you've reminded me that real love, real meaning comes from sacrifice, not status." Thomas didn't speak right away. His eyes searched hers, not for validation, but for understanding, and what he saw there was enough. "I'm not asking for your hand," he said gently. "I'm not expecting anything. I just want to keep playing. For someone who listens, someone who hears what I'm really saying." The breeze moved between them like a secret being passed. Olivia stepped closer. She reached out and took his hand in hers, their fingers intertwining slowly, as if they'd been waiting to do so for a long time. "Then play for me," she said. Her eyes shimmered under the dim light. "Play for me, forever." Neither of them moved for a moment. The world below carried on, busy and loud, but up here, time had stilled. Then, without hesitation, they leaned in and kissed softly, gently, as if sealing a promise neither of them had made lightly. The glow of the city wrapped around them, but the only light they truly noticed was the quiet flame now shared between their hearts. There were no more grand gestures needed, no performances, no conditions, just music, and love, and a future beginning in the quiet of twilight.